With the new millennium in reach, the Dakar Rally became more dangerous than ever. Humongous machines racing the desert at over 190 km per hour while weighing more than a modern-day BMW Rhino. It was a recipe for disaster, recipe that injured many of its competitors, and at times, even worse. It was only a matter of time until its organizers, ASO, would be forced to do something about it.
At the same time, in the shadows, BMW was looking for the perfect time to come back. Building a fast bike is one way to do it, but doing it in a time of change could help the Bavarians secure a spot on the top podium.
And when the Germans realized the impeding Dakar changes, they decided to act. This was the perfect time for the legendary manufacturer to step back in the ring. After their retirement in the 80s, BMW completely stopped any factory rallying effort. But as the 90s came to a close, they made a bet. They relied on the idea that the organizers had to find a way to slow down the bikes, and one of the only natural ways of doing that was by changing the tracks. By making the course narrower, twistier, they would effectively cap the top speed of the two-wheeled giants. That's why, despite their legacy being engraved in boxer engines, BMW surprised everyone. Their new rally machine was not a boxer. In fact, it wasn't even a twin. It was a small, lightweight, single-cylinder engine. A bet that would either pay massive dividends or show how disconnected the Bavarians had become from the rallying world.
One or the other, no in between. To be fair, BMW never fully dropped their boxer fantasy, but that's a story for another video. Their main efforts were stacked behind a new single-cylinder race machine.
The engineers took one of their old, tame F650s. At the base, it was a reliable, liquid-cooled single-cylinder motorcycle, featuring a double overhead cam and 42 horsepower. When it came out, it was supposed to be a lighter, more approachable platform compared to their other twins. Gottfried Michels and Richard Schalber, BMW's Dakar team manager, started modifying the F650 to make it ready to face the dunes. They employed the help of Bavarian engineers, and finally, for 1997, the Germans had a race-ready rally machine.
In a way, this particular motorcycle could be considered the granddad of modern-day rally bikes. It marked a new era. BMW had high hopes, and as the year progressed, their optimism slowly turned into depression.
The 20th edition of the famous race marked a return to its roots. After multiple years, the tracks took a more historic Paris to Dakar route. As the race commenced, an ocean of KTMs kept on chasing the trails of Peter Ansel's Yamaha. During the 9th stage, multiple teams were attacked mid-race, casting a dark shadow over the rally.
Because of an ambush just 10 kilometers from this point, where Crooks, he said, stole a Tatra. There were shots fired and two competitors only just made it back to the bivouac. Nobody was hurt, but for reasons of...
But as the finish flag dropped, 9 out of the top 10 motorcycles were orange-blooded KTMs. Crucially though, not the first one. That year, Stéphane Peteranzel managed to beat Fabrizio Meoni, claiming the only non-KTM spot at the top of the leaderboards.
6th win. Amazing.
In reality, it showed that Yamaha, without Stéphane, just wasn't the powerhouse it used to be. But it also showed a trend. The era of the big twins was slowly coming to an end. You might notice that I haven't mentioned BMW much. In fact, for the Germans, the race was nothing short of a disaster.
While they did return with a full factory effort, the best they were able to achieve was 35th. In fact, their motorcycles encountered mechanical issues one after another. In the end, that 35th bike was also the only one that got to the finish line. Indeed, this was a year to forget.
The motorcycle they built was clearly not up to the task. Not yet, at least. Look, BMW knew that just taking an F650 and throwing some mods at it was never going to be enough. So they went to the moon and back to change every single aspect of their starter platform.
On one hand, this gave them the performance they needed. But it also stripped all reliability expectations coming from their original F650 base.
The engineers increased the engine capacity to 700 cc's, and after meticulous tuning, they managed to extract 75 horses out of the liquid-cooled engine. It was a powerhouse, stronger than the KTMs of that era. Despite the advent of fuel injection, they stuck with good old carburetors, as those were fixable out in the open. All this made the German competitor reach speeds of up to 180 km per hour. But speed without stability is worthless, so they engineered a chromoly frame coupled with a titanium rear detachable subframe. To add to their stability, a WP setup was also developed, and what came as a shock back then, they employed a PDS absorber on the rear coupled directly to the swing arm. In reality, this wasn't an F650 any longer. And they didn't stop here. In their quest for saving and managing the weight, BMW designed 4 interconnected fuel tanks, 2 at the rear and 2 low-slung ones at the front. This was a big departure from the giant front-mounted units that preceded it. They molded a skid plate out of Kevlar and integrated the water reservoir into it. No gram was spared. The brake pedal had little holes in it, the intake was made of carbon fiber, while the radiator crash guard was manufactured out of titanium. The same carbon-titanium combination was also used in manufacturing and securing the fairings.
This entire mix of exotic materials made the F650RR weigh in at 168 kilos. Yeah, that's not as light as one would expect. Sure, a featherweight when compared to Peter Ansel's winning Yamaha, but on par with its Austrian counterparts.
Overall, it was a setup intended to provide as much stability as possible. This means that its handling and turning characteristics were a bit compromised, but for Dakar, it looked like an acceptable trade. The disaster of '98 didn't stop the Germans. In fact, it only made them want it more. Remember their initial bet? The one that ASO was going to change the way tracks were made? The bet became reality, and tracks were going to become tighter than ever. Another puzzle piece fell into place as Peteranzelo retired from two-wheeled racing, and with it, Yamaha altogether massively scaled back its Dakar involvement.
This left the door wide open for other manufacturers. But nobody thought about BMW at that point. You see, KTM was the new favorite, with names like Fabrizio Meoni, Kinnegartner, Sala, Alfie Cox, and many others. It seemed like they managed to sign all top contenders under the same umbrella.
In fact, for 1999, half of all motorcycles entered were orange-blooded. You see, you would have been a fool to bet on anyone but KTM. And yet, BMW had one last ace up their sleeve.
This bike is different, says Sainct. It's heavier and less maneuverable in tight corners, but with a more powerful engine than the KTM's. I think it will be up there with the opposition. The big concern, though, is the level of assistance during the race.
During the season, they managed to convince a young rider to switch sides from the Austrians.
That young fella was called Richard Sainct. The up-and-comer Frenchman saw in BMW what he could never find with KTM. A small, united, dedicated team.
A team that would listen and tailor their program according to his needs. At the time, nobody understood his decision. But Richard was determined to prove people wrong. And while doing so, prove himself he could take home the title. But on board a BMW, the odds were stacked against him. As the riders set off, Heinz Kinnegartner took an early lead, setting a pace many feared to match.
Same day, Kinnegartner drove as he always does. High speed, great poise, impressive.
But among the top riders was Richard in the BMW. He hung in there during the initial stages, and once the landscape opened up, the more powerful BMW could finally shine. Yet this rally proved to be one of the toughest editions. In stage 5, the top contenders were separated by seconds. Meanwhile, towards the back of the pack, 32 out of the remaining 137 riders didn't manage to get to the finish line. Gallardo, another BMW rider, was also having a great rally until his bike's battery decided to crap out. As good of a start as the Germans had, the old reliability problems came back to bite them. After 10 days of hard racing, Richard managed to stay up there while being hunted down by the KTMs.
There was only one aim amongst the KTM outfit, to catch Sainct. Agnelli determined to make inroads on the leader. But in the end, it was Richard who managed to keep up with me, and he simply overtook. After all that effort, I ended up in the dust. All my efforts were wasted. If Sainct ever felt any pressure, he never showed it. The Dakar leader had nerves of steel.
But the 1999 edition of the rally was marked by something else. As stage 12 approached its end, a few dozen armed robbers managed to stop 22 vehicles.
And those that came home late really were in trouble. In the middle of the night, 20 vehicles were stolen.
They stole their money, petrol, and even one of the motorcycles. The participants were held at gunpoint, stranded in the middle of the desert. When the attackers left, their leader was last heard saying, "Thanks very much. See you next year."
Many people still believe that these attackers were the same that caused havoc the year prior. Any way you put it, this left a bitter taste for competitors crossing Mauritania and Mali.
Back in the BMW camp, their bikes were dropping like flies. Well, with one exception. Richard's machine was still in the race. But even that had its problems. Because of the wind gusts in the desert, his motorcycle would lose power when going flat out. Richard had to take one hand off the handlebars and cover an intake port. This gave him an extra 15 km/h of top speed. Out of 164 bikes, only 54 managed to cross the finish line that year. KTM factory riders occupied 7 out of the top 10 positions. Normally, you'd say the orange team dominated. Well, that would be the case if you disregarded Richard Sainct. As riders approached into the distance, the BMW man had done it.
So the winner, as if we didn't know already, Richard Sainct at 29 years of age, and this the first victory for BMW since 1985.
Against all odds and mechanical issues, he managed to bring the glory back to the Germans. People doubted him for making the switch, his abilities, but Richard proved everyone wrong. This was his first Dakar win, and BMW's win in more than 10 years. All done by just 4 minutes. I can't believe it. On all the other rallies, BMW had nothing but problems. Even here, Brucy and Gallardo had one breakdown after the other, but Sainct just kept going. It is as if fate has decreed that Richard will win. Still, you have to take your hat off to Sainct. He hasn't put a foot wrong the whole rally.
Indeed, Richard made a perfect race. He was measured, tactical, and crucially, extremely quick.
Also notably, Andrea Meyer managed to win the women class, also on board a BMW. After years of twin-cylinder domination, the era of the agile singles was commencing.
But nobody would have guessed this era was going to be marked by BMW. From a distance, it seemed like the Bavarians had a perfect race. After all, they took home the title. But when they got home, they were forced to face a grim reality. In fact, the Germans were lucky.
When disassembling Richard's bike, the mechanics saw parts that were hanging by a thread. Many of those parts, if the rally had 1 or 2 extra stages, wouldn't have held together. Sure, they finished, but only barely. Engineers rallied around trying to reinforce the weak links. They designed a new airbox and filter system to prevent the wind gust issue they had faced. By doing so, this also allowed them to extract a bit more power out of the 700cc power plant.
The last thing you could call that team was complacent. They reworked the fuel tanks in order to concentrate more of the weight towards the center.
Afterwards, they loaded up the F650RR into a wind tunnel, further refining the gas tank's shape. Everything in order to achieve those last top-end km/h. After perfecting their craft, the F650RR lined up at the start again for the 2000 Dakar Rally. This time, the event started in Senegal and was headed towards Cairo. In an effort to avoid Mauritania and any other ambushes, the organizers took a drastic decision and rerouted the entire rally. Even so, 4 stages had to be cancelled due to terrorist threats in Niger.
Was the scene last night at Niamey in Niger, following the announcement of the risk of terrorist attack on this year's Dakar, warned to us by the French Foreign Ministry. We have decided to airlift all vehicles and personnel from Niamey to Saba in Libya.
This time, the organizers took no chances. That year, BMW had 6 factory riders in its roster, but from all of them, Richard Sainct shined brightest. For the second year in a row, the Frenchman monopolized the title.
That 10-kilometer dash, nobody really pushing hard. They don't want to break in the last few minutes of this 18-day rally. Richard Sainct, switching from KTM last year, 2 special stage wins this year. I'm just feeling my way over the sand. I'm not making mistakes now, no risks. And I'm about to win for the second year. Well, here is the finish just over this hill. And he makes it. What a great performance by the man who forsook KTM, went to BMW, shocked a lot of people last year, won and did it again this year, and tells us, well, it's really very nice to be in Egypt.
For him, this was an amazing achievement. But for BMW, it meant much more. You see, the top 4 bikes were all Bavarian. And even more, the first non-BMW motorcycle came in more than 3 hours behind the leader. Indeed, at the dawn of the millennium, BMW managed to show they hadn't forgotten their glory days. And they were a force to be reckoned with. The team was riding on a high when suddenly everything stopped. An announcement that took the world by surprise. But after their dominant year, BMW decided to retire from the rally.
For them, the case was closed. They came back, showed the world they still had it, proved their point, and went back home. A true German way of thinking.
After 4 very successful years in desert rallies, with 2 victories in the Dakar Rally as the absolute highlights, we have decided to set other priorities for our future motorsport activities.
Nowadays, we've seen where those priorities had shifted. The brand took a turn in focusing on adventure and exploration, leaving its racing pedigree behind.
But ultimately, they did what they intended. Wrote a new chapter in the history book. And Richard, he never gave up on the Dakar. In fact, he came back and won another title in 2003. After coming in second for the 04 edition, the Frenchman became more determined than ever. Unfortunately, this determination ended up taking his life. Richard lost his at the Faro Rally that same year. According to his teammates, he was a fighter, a young kid who would never give up, a figure that left a mark on the rally and people around him. You know, the more I work on these stories, the more I'm faced with a familiar ending. An ending where the protagonist ends up losing their life. It's a sad ending. It shows the brutal nature of the rally and how far some people are willing to go to achieve their dream. In a way, inspirational, but heartbreaking at the same time. It makes you wonder, what's too far?
You know, for BMW, this turned into a story of an underdog who came, got their rear end kicked, learned, adapted, and managed to conquer Dakar. A story that will remain etched in the history books. And a story that, without Richard Sainct, would have never happened. One person who completely changed those history books. Thanks for watching.